What happens if a home appraisal comes in lower than the purchase price? Can the deal still be salvaged? Hey, it's Mark Holden here, helping to educate and empower you on your journey through home ownership. What is an appraisal? Well, it's an unbiased estimate of a property's value at a specific point in time conducted by a disinterested third party who is a licensed appraiser. Now, this value is important because it determines how much a mortgage lender is willing to finance for the purchase of the home. An appraisal is usually required by the lender unless you have a pretty hefty down payment, like 20% or more. So the lender will order the appraisal, but guess who gets to pay for it? The buyer does, of course. Now, it'll run about $600 or more, depending on the size and complexity of the property. You see, the bottom line is that the lender wants to know that they can recoup their money in case you bail and they have to foreclose. So if you're paying cash, an appraisal isn't required. And an appraiser considers various factors like the home size, condition, upgrades, location, and recent sales of comparable properties in the area. Now, if the appraisal comes in at or above the purchase price, everything's hunky-dory and the transaction proceeds as normal. Now, I hope that the listing agent provided a packet to the appraiser showing how they justified the sales price. But what if the appraisal comes in lower than the purchase price? Does that mean the deal is sunk? Well, no. You have a few options here. Well, first, you might be able to contest the appraisal, which would be the job of the real estate agent. However, you can't just say that you don't like the appraised value or you think the appraiser got it wrong. You have to bring new facts to the table that the appraiser might not have taken into consideration. For example, maybe another home in the neighborhood sold for a higher price after the appraisal had been completed. Or maybe there was a property that sold off market that the appraiser didn't know about, and both which could possibly affect the comps. But still, there's no guarantee that the appraisal will change. And the other more common option is for the buyer and the seller to renegotiate the sales price. There's no rule of thumb here. The buyer and the seller simply have to agree on how to move forward. And the seller may lower the price to the appraised value, or maybe both parties can find a happy middle ground. And if they can't agree, the buyer may elect to terminate the contract based on a failure to meet the conditions of the financing contingency. In a competitive market, a buyer may want to offer what's called an appraisal waiver to the seller. In that case, the buyer is saying that they'll buy the property even if the appraisal comes in low. Now, they can offer a partial waiver, which sets the bar at a minimum appraised value, or they can offer a full waiver saying, I don't care what the appraisal says, I'm buying this house. In either case, the buyer has to produce the cash necessary to cover that gap between the waiver amount and the purchase amount. Let's do an example. Let's say that the purchase price is $400,000. The buyer included a partial appraisal waiver of $395,000, basically saying they can cover a $5,000 gap. Well, let's say the appraisal comes in at $390,000. Since it's below the $395,000 minimum, the buyer could terminate the contract or they could renegotiate with the seller. If they had offered a full appraisal waiver in the same example, the buyer would be obligated to bring the extra $10,000 to closing. Now, to be clear, the cash that's involved in an appraisal waiver is in addition to the down payment and the closing costs. So be careful. Make sure you have the cash on hand to fulfill that guarantee. When we help write a purchase offer, we'll run comps on that property because we want to try to zero in on that appraised value. Because the last thing we want is to put you in a difficult situation while you're under contract. Well, hopefully this helps you to better understand appraisals and why they're such an important part of any home purchase agreement.